When a homeless man approached Clint Eastwood asking for just $1, he never could have predicted the legendary actor's life-altering reaction. It was a mild afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day where the sun's warmth kept the chill of the breeze at bay. Outside a quiet café on Melrose Avenue, a man sat alone at an outdoor table, wearing sunglasses that partially concealed his face, yet his identity was unmistakable. Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend. Though time had softened the chiseled edges of his features, his presence remained magnetic. Pedestrians occasionally stole glances in his direction, unsure whether to disturb his moment of solitude. Across the street, another man stood unnoticed by most. His clothes, worn and layered, bore the weight of days spent exposed to the elements. His hair was unkempt, and in one hand he clutched a small cardboard sign while the other fidgeted nervously in his pocket. His name was Kevin. Today marked 3 weeks since he had begun sleeping behind a dumpster near a convenience store. Hunger gnawed at him. He hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. As he scanned the cafe, searching for someone who might take pity on him, his gaze landed on Clint Eastwood. At first he hesitated. What were the chances that a man like Eastwood would care about someone like him? But hunger has a way of erasing pride. Taking a deep breath, Kevin stepped off the curb, each step heavier than the last. His voice was barely above a whisper as he reached the actor's table. "Sir, could you spare $1?" Clint looked up slowly, removing his sunglasses. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment Kevin regretted his decision. But then, Clint leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing Kevin as though piecing together a puzzle. Seconds stretched into what felt like eternity, amplifying Kevin's anxiety. He was ready to apologize and walk away when Clint finally spoke. "$1, huh?" His tone was neutral. Then with the faintest hint of a smile, he added, "Sit down. Let's talk." Kevin froze. He hadn't expected that. The invitation felt unreal, like a scene from one of the movies he used to watch before life fell apart. He searched Clint's face for any sign that this was a cruel joke, but found only calm curiosity. There was no mockery, no condescension, just an openness that felt both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Murmuring a quiet, "Thank you, Kevin," slid into the chair across from Clint, his hands trembling slightly as he placed the cardboard sign on the table, angling it so it wouldn't attract too much attention. He could feel Clint's eyes on him, not with judgment, but with curiosity, as if he were peeling back the layers of hardship to uncover the story beneath. Kevin wasn't used to this. Most people avoided eye contact, dropped some spare change into his hand, and moved on without a second thought. Nobody wanted to hear his story anymore. But here, under Clint Eastwood's unwavering gaze, the words started tumbling out before he could stop them. "I'm sorry if I bothered you," Kevin stammered, his voice raw. I hate asking. I've been trying to find work, but it's tough. Harder than I ever thought it'd be." He lowered his gaze, ashamed of how desperate he sounded. Clint didn't interrupt, he just listened, something most people hadn't done in years. Kevin swallowed hard and continued, the dam breaking. "I was a contractor, had my own crew, steady work. Then the recession hit. Jobs dried up, savings disappeared, late notices piled up, and after that," his voice faltered, "well, you can guess the rest." He let out a bitter chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Funny, isn't it? I spend my whole life building homes for other people, and now I can't even keep a roof over my own head." Clint's face remained impassive, but his eyes softened. Kevin felt the weight of shame creeping back in. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to steer the conversation away from himself. "I know you probably get asked for things all the time," he muttered. "I don't want to be just another guy with his hand out. He exhaled heavily. "I don't know what else to do anymore." But Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of man to dismiss a story like that. His response was something Kevin never saw coming. Leaning forward, Clint rested his elbows on the table, his hands clasped loosely. The air between them grew heavier, quieter, as if the world had slowed down for this one conversation. Kevin's pulse quickened. He braced himself, half expecting Clint to hand him a few dollars and send him on his way, like everyone else. Instead, Clint asked a question Kevin never expected. "What's your name?" Kevin blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. "Kevin," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Clint nodded slowly, letting the name settle in his mind. "Kevin?" he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Then after a brief pause he added, "You know, Kevin, I've played a lot of roles in my life. Cowboys, soldiers, detectives. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that every one of them had a story. Good, bad, ugly. It didn't matter. What mattered was how they chose to carry it." He leaned forward slightly. "So tell me, what's the next chapter of your story?" Kevin blinked, unsure if Clint was serious. The next chapter? The idea felt foreign, almost absurd. "The next chapter?" he echoed, disbelief creeping into his tone. "Yeah," Clint said, leaning back in his chair. "You're still here, aren't you? Breathing, talking, asking for $1. That means your story isn't over yet. So, what comes next?" A lump formed in Kevin's throat. He had no answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought that far ahead in a long time. When every day was a battle just to survive, there was little room for planning beyond the next meal. "I don't know," he admitted at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I just want to make it through the day." Clint's eyes narrowed, not in frustration, but in thought. "That's not a chapter, Kevin," he said plainly. "That's a sentence. You need a real chapter, something to build on." Kevin felt a mix of frustration and curiosity stir inside him. He wanted to ask Clint what he knew about struggling to survive, but something in the actor's tone stopped him. Clint wasn't just tossing out cliches. He genuinely wanted Kevin to think. Then Clint reached into his pocket. Kevin's heart sank. Here it was, the part where Clint would pull out a bill, hand it over, and send him on his way. But Clint didn't take out cash. Instead, he pulled out a small business card and slid it across the table. "Go here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's a shelter run by a friend of mine. They'll help you get cleaned up, find work, maybe even a place to stay. But it's up to you to take the first step." Kevin stared at the card, his hands trembling. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" Clint's expression softened just a fraction. "Because someone did it for me once, and I wouldn't be sitting here if they hadn't." Kevin hesitated. Second chances? He wasn't sure he believed in them anymore, not after everything. His fingers hovered over the card as if it were fragile, like the promise it carried might shatter if he touched it. The name and address printed on it seemed like a lifeline, but doubt weighed heavily on him. Could he really trust this? Could he trust Clint? "I don't know, man," Kevin muttered after a long silence, shaking his head. "I've tried places like that before. They don't really help people like me." Clint's gaze didn't waver. "People like you?" he asked. "What does that even mean?" Kevin swallowed hard, avoiding eye contact. "You wouldn't get it. Guys like me, we're just forgotten." Clint leaned forward, his voice quieter but firm. "You think I've never been down? You think I don't know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world and no one's there to help you lift it?" Kevin looked up, startled. Clint's face, though calm, carried the weight of his words. "I grew up dirt poor during the Great Depression," Clint continued. "I know what it's like to go to bed hungry, wondering if tomorrow will be any better. And let me tell you something, Kevin, it's not about how hard you fall. It's about whether you're willing to get back up, even when everything seems stacked against you." The words hit Kevin harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to push back, but nothing came out. Clint leaned back, his tone softening. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I have all the answers, but here's what I do know. Life isn't fair. It never will be. The only thing you can do is decide whether you're going to let that break you or build you." Kevin felt his eyes sting, but he quickly blinked the feeling away. "It's not that simple," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "No, it's not," Clint agreed. "But simple doesn't mean easy. It's hard as hell, but if you don't try, you'll never know what could have been." Kevin looked down at the card again, his mind racing. He thought about the cold nights sleeping on concrete, the scavenged meals, the countless faces that passed him by without a second glance. And now here was this man, this stranger, this legend, telling him he was worth more than all of that. For the first time in years, Kevin felt something stir inside him. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just the realization that he had nothing left to lose. "I'll think about it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Clint nodded as if that was enough. "Good. That's all I'm asking." But Kevin wasn't the only one changed by this conversation. Clint had his own reasons for stepping in, reasons that would soon come to light. Kevin held the business card tightly as he stood up, unsure of what to say or how to process everything that had just happened. Clint's words lingered in his mind, stirring up memories he had long buried, memories of better times, of dreams that once felt within reach. As he took a few hesitant steps away, he turned back briefly. "Thanks for listening," he said, his voice barely rising above the steady hum of the city. Clint gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Take care of yourself, Kevin," he said simply, before slipping his sunglasses back on and returning to his coffee. What Kevin didn't see, however, was the slight hesitation in Clint's hand as he reached for his cup, the way his jaw clenched momentarily, as if fighting back a flood of emotions. Now alone again, Clint let out a slow breath, his gaze falling on the empty chair Kevin had just occupied. It wasn't the first time he had been reminded of his past, but for some reason this moment struck deeper than most. He had been even younger than Kevin when he first learned how quickly life could knock you down. Growing up during the Great Depression, he had watched his parents struggle to put food on the table. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than a single can of beans shared between them. But there had also been strangers, neighbors, church members, sometimes even complete strangers, who had stepped in with small gestures of kindness that made all the difference. He thought of one man in particular, a mechanic who had given him his first job cleaning tools. It wasn't glamorous, but it had taught him something invaluable, the dignity of work no matter how small. That man had seen potential in a scrawny kid when no one else did, and that small chance had changed the course of Clint's life. Now, decades later, that lesson remained with him. He had built a career that most could only dream of, but he had never forgotten where he came from or the people who had helped him along the way. For Clint, helping Kevin wasn't about charity, it was about giving someone else the same kind of chance he had once been given. He knew Kevin's road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that sometimes all it took was one person believing in you to spark something bigger. Meanwhile, Kevin wandered the streets, still clutching the card as if it might disappear. He passed by storefronts, catching his reflection in the glass, tired, worn, defeated. But for the first time in years, he felt something different, a flicker of something new. Stopping outside a laundromat, he stared at the dim, flickering neon sign. With the little money he had left, he made a decision. He would wash his clothes. If he was going to show up at the shelter Clint had mentioned, he wanted to look presentable. It wasn't much, but it was a step. And that first step would be the hardest and most important one he had taken in years. Kevin's first visit to the shelter was overwhelming. The bright fluorescent lights, the hurried footsteps, the low murmur of conversation, it all made him feel like he didn't belong. But the staff was kind. They didn't judge him for his ragged appearance or his hesitation. For the first time in a long time, Kevin felt like someone truly saw him, not as a problem, but as a person. Days turned into weeks, and though the journey wasn't smooth, he slowly began to rebuild his life. The shelter helped him find a temporary job at a nearby warehouse. He worked hard, proving himself reliable, and soon the job became more stable. With his earnings, he was able to move into a small shared apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over his head, a step toward something more permanent. Through it all, he often thought about Clint Eastwood. He had kept the business card, now creased and worn, as a reminder of the day that had changed everything. One night, after an exhausting shift, Kevin sat down and wrote Clint a letter. He thanked him for his kindness that day at the café and told him about the progress he had made. Kevin didn't expect a response, but writing the letter felt like a way to close a chapter, a way to acknowledge the man who had given him a second chance. Months later, Clint received the letter. Sitting in his quiet office, he read it slowly, a faint smile forming at the corners of his mouth. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with other mementos, small reminders of the moments that had shaped his life. For Clint, it was never about recognition or gratitude. It was about paying forward the compassion that had once been shown to him. But Kevin's story didn't end there. Inspired by his own journey, he began volunteering at the same shelter that had helped him. He spoke to others who were struggling, sharing his story, offering them encouragement, the same kind that Clint had given him. Slowly but surely, he became a symbol of resilience, a quiet source of hope in his community. The café on Melrose Avenue remained a backdrop to countless lives passing by, unaware of the life-changing conversation that had taken place there. But for Kevin and Clint, it would always be more than just a meeting. It was proof of the power of human connection, a simple gesture that rippled outward in ways neither of them could have foreseen. And for those who hear their story, it serves as a reminder, sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep spreading stories that remind us of the power of compassion and second chances.